Hi.
Did I just freeze?
You did for a second. That's okay. That look. I love that look. Oh my gosh. You feel like refreshed and rejuvenated because you got to finally take your first vacation ever.
I took that vacation.
You read a book.
Very seriously.
Yes.
I vacated on that vacation.
So jealous.
That was like maximum leisure, and it was really cool. And the thing that helped was that I didn't have internet, and so when I wanted to go like get into it, I couldn't. So like if I was going to go lay on the beach, I have my phone, I would normally like get sucked into the chat or like reading my emails or like doing whatever, and I didn't have any data. So I read an actual book.
I know. I was so beside myself when you said that. I'm like, I can't remember the last time I got to read a book. Twilight, actually, I do remember.
Book in a day and a half. And it was a good book, but it wasn't even like that good of a book. But it was just like the luxury of reading a book at a slow pace in the sun. Like,
I love that for you.
It was great.
I'm excited.
I loved it. Highly
me
recommend.
Next, please. Yeah, me next. It's going to be a little bit, but I'm next. I'm really planning what that's going to be. Like,
you have all those little kids, so it'll be a while before you read a book, I think.
That is true.
That doesn't have pictures.
Oh, I did get our books that we ordered, those surrogate books. I'm excited to read those.
I got mine too, and I got them while I was on vacation. Otherwise, I would have read those while I was on vacation, but I didn't. So I have them now, and I will be reading them, and then hopefully that'll be something that we can recommend
to our
or share with some of our surrogates and intended parents if we think it'll be useful. So that'll be cool.
I'm excited.
But
today we have the most infamous Dean Masserman.
Yes. I'm so excited and so grateful that he's willing to spend some time with us today, because he is one of the rare professionals in this space that's been doing it for such a long time, that he speaks with such a confidence on whatever the topic is. And I actually believe what he's saying. It's not just like, I think some people misread confidence as arrogance, but it's like, you know what? I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't have any qualms about sharing what I know. And I love that. So I'm so excited to pick his brain on something as sensitive as like the political climate surrounding surrogacy. We have so many fears and what if scenarios that, we're not going to have all the answers. Dean's not going to have all the answers. But he can at least give us some insight and tell us, what's a reasonable fear and what's not a reasonable fear, and hopefully give us a little bit of hope, silver linings.
I think he will. And I'm grateful for what he does every day, because I think that's why there are all the different brackets of professionals that we have. We have our attorneys, we have the doctors, we have the insurance brokers, because we want to make sure that when we're investing this time into this process, that we're working with a professional who knows the ins and outs as much as possible, so that we can have an educated understanding of what to anticipate. So I'm grateful for his words of wisdom and the insight he brings all the time and every day, and just giving this an opportunity to ask questions and hopefully relieve some of the fears for some of them that are having the questions now that we are approaching this new administration.
Yeah. Nobody has a crystal ball. We can't predict what the future's going to hold, but I think it's important to stay informed and, try to do the best we can with what we do know. So I can't wait to bring him in and hear what he has to say about it. First, welcome to Surrogacy is a Podcast. We're so excited to have you today to talk about some of the things that are really, there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of what ifs about what's going to happen since the election. How's this going to impact the fertility industry? How's this going to impact surrogacy in general? And everything's going to be speculation, of course, at this point, but we just love to have somebody with your depth of knowledge and who's been in this industry for a long time. So Dean Masserman, welcome. I would love if you could, for those who don't know you, if you could introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your expertise and how long you've been in this field, and
I would be happy to do that. So I've been in this field since 1994, so coming up on 31 years. We started when there were no laws in California. I had come out of the public defender's office and the DA's office. And I knew a lot of judges. So we were renting office space from a company called CSP, which is still in business. And the owner of CSP walked down the hallway and said, "Hey, I need a lawyer to do this. Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Sure." So I went into a friendly judge that I knew, and I explained, I have this contract. This woman's a surrogate. She's carrying a baby for this couple. And I want a judgment. She said, fine. She was a rogue judge, older woman who had a discontent with the entire system and was a contrarian and hated the presiding judge and loved the idea of doing something new that would piss him off. So she signed my judgment, and then a few weeks later I went back with a gay couple, and she said sure, and she did that, and we had a little balloon party. And then it just started to proliferate and grow bigger. And then suddenly we all got called downtown to the presiding judge and said, "What are you doing?" And we explained it, and we came up with a system. And then, a few years after that, this was 90, 95, 96, 97. And then this case, Buzanka versus Buzanka came out and said it was, legal to enforce a contract. And then we started writing. We got a lawmaker up in Sacramento to sponsor a bill. And we wrote the bill, me and a couple other lawyers in the industry wrote the entire bill, and it became the law, and that's the law we have now. So I'm certainly happy to say I had a hand in the current state of the laws, and this law became the model for other states like Washington, Oregon, Nevada. Pretty much all copied our laws. So we've probably done, I don't even know, 32,000 family building cases, whether, egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, IVF, surrogacy, adoption, helping people build their families. I also have a litigation background, which a lot of lawyers in our industry do not have. I've litigated a lot in federal court and state court, which gives me a unique perspective because I also still handle a lot of litigation cases. So when it comes time to enforcement, if a surrogate tries to change their mind, if the IPs try to change their mind, if something happened with someone's embryos, they'll hire us and we'll resolve that matter for them. So I have a specialized, unique background because none of the other lawyers, except maybe one who has some litigation background, actually go to that next level to enforce these laws.
Yeah.
So I think it gives me a good perspective.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. I know we've worked with you for years, and I've been so in awe of your guys' practice and what you guys have created. I didn't know that. I guess learning just a little bit more of your litigation background, that's really neat. And I do think that it gives a perspective when you're dealing with a surrogate who maybe has something in her contract that says she's allowed this or isn't allowed this, then you have the ability to lean in a little bit more and assist. So I think that's great.
I think a lot of people
call it leaning in is a nice way to put it. Yeah.
Lean on. Yeah. No, put the squeeze on. Yeah. I think a lot of surrogacy contracts are they're all hypothetical, right? And most people imagine you're never going to come to a time where you have to enforce that. And I think that's something that surrogates worry about is you have your intended parents who are covering counsel to review the contract with you. But say somebody breaks the contract, the surrogate doesn't really have financial means or recourse to fight it out if they have to. And I know that's something that I worried about as a surrogate. I was like, I hope everybody is honest and doing what they say they're going to do, because if they don't, I don't really have legal fees to enforce it. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, and typically that's something that we try and address in our contracts, because you can say that in the event of a dispute, the prevailing party recovers their attorney fees, and then it will be easier for you to find a lawyer who will take your case on what's essentially a contingency basis, knowing that if you have a strong case and you're going to win, that you'll recoup those fees on the back end.
Yeah. I see so many contracts, or I have over the years with agencies where they have the intended parents fund the escrow in stages, and
that's bad.
Makes me so nervous.
Yeah, based on their word. What are you talking about? Yeah. She's pregnant. What's she going to do? She's 20 weeks and they owe $80,000 more to be what's she going to do? She's not. Nobody wants to terminate a healthy pregnancy if they don't. I don't know. Yeah. So I see that a lot. We could go down so many different tracks. I just want to pick your brain for hours. Can we?
Sorry,
I have 2 hours.
Good. Sold. We'll make 2 podcasts out of this.
Let's see what we can get out of you. But I really want to talk about the task at hand, which is we have a lot of surrogates right after the election. It was a flip. It was a total coin toss which way it was going to go. But for our industry in particular, we were all really nervous because of the way that we saw Roe being overturned, impacting embryo personhood in Alabama and all these things, and IVF being threatened. People are nervous. And so we're getting a lot of questions from surrogates and from intended parents about what's this going to mean for them. So I would love, if there's off the top of your head, if you've had any clients that have asked you big questions that you've had to answer. And then I, of course, have all the FAQs that we have that I'll go through with you too. But if there's anything off the top of your head that has been on people's minds since the election that you could shed light on.
I mean, really, I'm getting more inquiries from agencies who, especially agencies who obviously specialize in international couples, who are calling me and asking me. The individual clients aren't really coming directly to me and asking me the questions, but obviously the big overall arching question is, is Trump going to try and end birthright citizenship? And what impact is that going to have on the IVF industry? Will he carve out an exception for IVF, et cetera, et cetera? And I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, if you take him at his word, which I do, he's been saying since, 2015, before the first election that he was elected, that he wanted to end birthright citizenship. He didn't do anything about it in that first term. I know that this Project 2025 plan, which is known to exist, talks about it. I don't think he's backed away from it. But I think people need to look at it in a certain context, really 2 contexts. One is logistically, how could it be done? Number 1. And number 2, you have to understand that he's going after illegal immigrants, Mexican migrants that illegally cross the border and then have kids in the United States. He's not going after the IVF industry specifically. So there's things that he might try and do. We can go through those things. And then the question is, will it apply to IVF? And will he carve out an exception or not? And can he really be successful?
Mm-hmm. And I think most of us don't know at all how that process would work. I think most Americans that are not having a legal background like myself just assume anything can be done with an executive order. President waves his magic wand, says, I want this, and so this is so it is. Is that something that you could do with ending birthright citizenship, or is there a much more complex process?
Well, if you were doing it the legal way, it would be a much more complex process. The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution specifically states that a child born on U.S. soil is a citizen of the United States regardless of their parents' citizenship or immigrant status. And that goes back to the 1800s. The bottom line is to initiate a constitutional amendment requires a 2/3 vote of Congress, which you'll never get. He just won't be able to do it through what we would call the real legal way to do it. So what will he try and do to get around it? Through executive order. You can't change the Constitution on an executive order, even though the Supreme Court has recognized that presidents can make executive orders. But he can certainly make it very difficult. So let's say, for example, one of the things I read is that he will just instruct people to stop issuing birth certificates. When I say people, I mean states. States issue birth certificates and say you're not allowed to issue a birth certificate for any child born in the U.S. unless at least one parent is a U.S. citizen. That could be an executive order. I don't think the states would follow it, but it obviously depends on the state. Each state has its own laws, but the laws are based on federal law. He's not changing federal law. So the way things work is states cannot enact a law or refuse to abide by a law if it conflicts with federal law. So everyone says, oh, it's states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. You can do that as long as it doesn't conflict with another federal law, right? You can't trump federal law with state law. No pun intended. So, but he's not changing federal law. He's issuing an executive order. So I think states could legally ignore any demand by the Trump administration to stop issuing birth certificates. Certainly California and its governor, Newsom, would not abide by that law. Now, would the governor of Alabama abide by that law? Would the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, abide by that law? I bet you they would. I'll bet you Texas governor will say, if the Trump administration says that at least one parent must be a U.S. citizen, we're going to abide by that and order the state to stop issuing birth certificates until citizenship, legal status can be proven. That won't happen in California. It won't happen in a blue state. It won't happen in New York. It won't happen in Nevada. It won't happen in Washington, Oregon. And then there'll be a constitutional challenge, right? Mm-hmm. Someone's going to file a lawsuit. Probably the Trump administration sues California or vice versa. And a Ninth Circuit federal judge in California will put a stay on any executive order that says that, and it works its way up all the way to the Supreme Court. That's one way to do it. I also heard the Trump administration might order the Social Security Administration, which is a federal agency, to stop issuing Social Security numbers to children born in the U.S. unless one parent is a U.S. citizen. Now, mind you, these are not like crazy ideas. Most states, most countries don't have birthright citizenship. There's no country in Europe that's a democracy that has birthright citizenship. When we do international surrogacy, you have two German people having a baby. One of them has to be a German citizen to get citizenship for the baby. This is not crazy talk, right? So, so
I guess the reason agencies would be concerned about that so much is because they're worried about their international clientele. If maybe their purpose of having a baby through surrogacy here is to obtain U.S. citizenship. And I don't know how many people are concerned about that. If your reason for having a surrogate carry your child is so that you can have a baby and you choose to have that baby in the United States because the surrogacy laws are friendly here, then whether or not you get that bonus of the child being a U.S. citizen doesn't really matter that much. But I guess it would impact for certain parents if they would decide to have their child with a surrogate in one of these states like Texas or Alabama or something that's likely to.
Well, and my thought is potentially then those intended parents are going to want to lean towards matching with a surrogate in a state that is a blue state that recognizes us potentially as like a safeguard, maybe.
Right. I mean, we're going to have to wait. I mean, I hate to discourage people to go to a particular state.
Yeah,
right. But certainly, I mean, the reality is we already tell our clients, because of the abortion laws and the 6-week abortion bans, take that into consideration when deciding what state you want to go do surrogacy in, because you're going to have limited options. So, if someone says we're pro-choice and we want our surrogate to terminate if, prenatal testing determines there's something significantly wrong with the fetus, then I'm going to tell them, don't go to Texas. It's a felony there. Don't go to Alabama. Don't go to Mississippi. Don't go to Florida. This will just further, that conversation and more solidify which states are safe and okay to go to right now. To your prior comment, Sunshine, I think most people do not come to the United States specifically because they want their child to be a U.S. citizen. That's more of a bonus. Mm-hmm. I think that people come here because it's the only country in the world where you can do commercial surrogacy and where the contracts have found to be, enforceable and have been upheld by the courts. There are a couple countries people go to where supposedly commercial surrogacy is okay, but it's not codified and it's never been challenged, and there's always a risk a court might say no.
Well, and also an agency making sure that they're doing all of the steps correctly to protect all parties and that a surrogate is qualified to even be a surrogate. It's safe for her to do.
So the United States really is the only destination where you're going to have all those types of assurances and guarantees.
Yeah, yeah.
And at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to change. Look, we can talk about Trump might do this, Trump might do that. Remember that he's going after people who are using their kids as, anchor babies so that they can, try and attain lawful status in the United States. And certainly IVF and surrogacy is not about that.
No.
So I think even if he made some of these executive orders, I think if he consulted with the right people, if he consulted with me and he said, listen, I want to implement these things, but I don't want to affect IVF, how can we do that? And, if you have a written contract and people are returning back to their home country, you can put a whole, series of steps in there to carve out exceptions for IVF, then I think it would work. Is he going to consult me? No. Is he
well, he should.
Yeah.
No.
Maybe he will now.
I do feel like, though,
out,
signals have been that he does care about IVF, and he does care about it. Yeah.
That Elon Musk has used surrogacy to have a number of his 10 children. And, obviously Elon has Trump's ear. Elon is a U.S. citizen, so maybe he'll say it doesn't apply to my situation. But I know that there's a certain number of friendly people who are friendly to IVF and surrogacy, even in his own administration.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of does give me comfort for it, because I think that the thing is there's a lot of, it's also tied up, right, with the termination, with abortion laws, with people, with the religious aspect of these things, and that influence that's gotten Trump into the White House again. Is where do his loyalties lie? I think it's what it scares people the most. But I think he's kind of demonstrated that he cares more about the people that are around him and that are in his ear than he has any sort of like real true code of ethics or anything that he's following. He's kind of like, floundering in the wind of whoever has got his attention. So
most of the people in his ear are people that I wouldn't trust. So it just
right, but they're not anti-IVF for the most part.
They're not anti-IVF. They are, though, predominantly people who claim that embryos are people, which is another risk to IVF. So it's fine to say, I don't know, we can go down so many roads in this podcast, but
I know
this whole thing where they say, we're fine with IVF, we love IVF, we issued an exception to the Alabama Supreme Court ruling and we protected clinics. It's all bullshit, really, because what they didn't do is clearly define whether or not an embryo is a person in that law, and they didn't define what you can do with those embryos. So that's coming down the road, because you can say, clinics, the law really said if something happens with an embryo, the clinic has immunity from liability. That doesn't really solve the critical question that the religious right has, which is, are embryos people or not? Can you throw out a bad embryo? What happens if you drop an embryo? What happens if you put the wrong embryo in the wrong uterus? How many embryos can you store? Can you thaw? These are people. If you treat embryos as people, the entire landscape of the industry completely changes. It doesn't shut it down, but it will make it prohibitively more expensive and fraught.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me have my moment and then popping my bubble.
Well, listen, let me not pop your bubble.
Please.
At the
please,
end of the day,
please.
IVF is not going away, whether it's for domestic couples or international couples. And at the end of the day, I think that international couples will be able to continue to come to the United States to do surrogacy. We're just going to have to deal with some shit for the next 4 years where he's trying to, end birthright citizenship, but not impact IVF. And that's just going to create, it's going to take some litigation. It's going to take judicial intervention. It's going to take changes in the laws. I mean, look at the reality is, let's say, okay, I'm ending birthright citizenship. Any child born to a person who's not a U.S. citizen does not get citizenship. Well, guess what? Every surrogate we use is a U.S. citizen. It's not a complicated workaround. We'll just go in post-birth and finalize parental rights instead of doing it pre-birth.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
The law that we wrote in California actually allows for that. We have the option of getting PBOs, which are pre-birth orders, and getting that judgment before birth. We also have the option of doing it post-birth. So we'll just do everything post-birth. And you can do post-birth in most states, and for exigent circumstances, which is, exigent meaning it's kind of an emergency situation, whatever. So let's say you didn't get your judgment, the baby was born early. You get it post-birth. Some states like Minnesota have laws that specifically require that it be done post-birth. It's not going to, and these cases that will get litigated and the stays that will be put in place at the federal level, and then by the time it gets up to the Supreme Court, which will probably punt on the issue and kick it back to Congress, it will almost be the end of Trump's term, and he'll be on his way out because it takes 3 or 4 years to get this stuff done. So I'm not worried about it. I'm not popping your bubble. I'm
Good. Thank you.
Hurdles that we're going to have to jump through or over, and things we're going to have to deal with. It's never going to stop at the state level. It's just not, in my opinion.
Yeah. I know Texas has obviously these laws that can convict somebody for leaving the state if they're trying to have a termination, if they've found an abnormality, et cetera, et cetera. Florida, I know there's termination laws, but in what we've told intended parents is you have the ability to go to the next state over for that termination because there isn't those things that are going to prohibit them. I know you had mentioned you don't necessarily recommend Florida. There's a lot of really great surrogates in Florida. So I guess my question to you is, how are you educating the intended parents, and what are you seeing as far as that? Is that an option? Can they know that there's an ability for them to go to the next state over if they need to?
I think everybody in our industry and everybody who's thinking of becoming an intended parent or a surrogate knows that they might have to go to the next state over. As an agency, as a lawyer, I wouldn't want to get into the habit of advocating it. Certainly not in Texas, because even advocating for it is a felony,
Texas.
Right?
Right, correct.
Will Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, follow suit and suddenly say it's a felony in Florida too? It wouldn't shock me if he were to find out that there was an exodus of surrogates. And when you say go next door, they're not going next door. What's next door to Florida?
Right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm like, Alabama?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Georgia?
No. On a plane. You would have to go
New York.
east above North Carolina, right? Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., or you have to go west all the way to like Colorado.
Yeah.
Or you'd have to go far north to like Minnesota or Wisconsin. It's not like I can just drive in my car and cross the border and get an abortion.
Yeah.
So it's something that you have to really contemplate. There's a lot of good women in a lot of states, but logistically and realistically, I don't think it's a go-to zone right now.
Popping bubbles again.
I know. I just saw Casey's bubble deflate. We have so many wonderful surrogates in Florida that I guess what I would love to hear, and maybe you can help me or maybe you can't, but I would love to hear some hope for the future of us going back to Roe times, like federally, if it wasn't Trump, if it was somebody else. And I don't know why Biden didn't or couldn't do this, but why haven't they made it a constitutional right for women to make decisions about what they're doing with their bodies? Like, is there a landscape in the future where this can be corrected, or is it just going to be the slippery slope into Handmaid's Tale that everybody is afraid of?
The pendulum never stops swinging. It goes this way, it goes this way, and eventually you hope that it lands somewhere in the middle. I won't inject my personal opinions on things, but I'm comfortable saying unless the woman's life is in danger, I wouldn't believe in a third trimester abortion. So I think if lawmakers and I think the general public would support an abortion ban after, let's say, 18 weeks, 16 to 18 weeks, I know that a lot of the testing that's done on fetuses is at 17 weeks. Before you can really know if the child is developing healthy or not. So, but they always seem to be stuck on like 15, 16 weeks. So maybe we can improve the, in utero testing a little bit. But if they could reach an agreement on, let's say, a 15-week abortion ban, unless the mother's life is in danger, I think that would be satisfactory to everybody, including our industry. If the woman is a victim of rape or sexual assault, she will know by that time and she can terminate it if she wants to. If there's something significantly wrong with the child and it's going to be severely impaired or maybe not even survive the pregnancy, you can terminate and you'll know in that time period. I think that would be reasonable. And that's probably where we'll end up. Are we going to end up there next year? No.
Yeah.
But I think if Congress could write a law like that, they would get universal support from both sides of the aisle and the general public.
Yeah.
Now, you're not going to ever satisfy everyone. There will always be people on the far right who are saying any abortion is, against God's will. And you're going to have progressive, radical people on the left who are going to say telling women what to do at any time of pregnancy is violative of her personal rights. I don't really agree with either extreme.
Yeah.
You have to remember that a healthy unborn child at 18 or 20 weeks cannot advocate for itself and perhaps shouldn't be terminated.
I think what I've always kind of leaned in that direction too, that like we could have a hard line that says this is too late and this is not acceptable. But I think there's always these things, especially being in this field, you learn how many different variables come into play with the child and how, what the outcome's going to be. And so where I've kind of fallen is like, we can't have a law that covers all of those different things. So wouldn't it be safe to trust women and their doctors to make decisions? I don't know. But of course there are always going to be those women and those doctors that are going to do things that shouldn't be done, right?
Any large group of people in any industry or in any population, there's always 1% that are bad apples. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say you have 11 million law enforcement officers in the United States. 1% of 11 million is like, I don't know, 110,000. I'm not really good at math. That's why I'm a lawyer. That's 110,000 really bad cops who are pulling people over because of the color of their skin or using excessive force. That's a lot, 110,000. It's only 1%. And there's, 10,900,000 really good cops. But that 1% is bad. Same with doctors, same with lawyers, same with agency owners, same with anything. And you trust women and doctors to make the right choice, but 1% of them won't. And those are the cases you're going to see on the news. Those are the cases that are going to have bad outcomes. And that 1% will dictate what lawmakers and legislators and politicians do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I trust 99% of the people, but that's not the ones I have to worry about.
Yeah.
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 How exhausting.
Yeah. I take it back. I don't want a 2-hour podcast.
Go away. No, just kidding. No.
My job as a lawyer is to anticipate problems in advance and prevent them. So we're not sitting here talking about something that's in the news right now. We're not talking about some, particular case. If you ask me what could possibly go wrong, of course I'm going to have 20 different things that I could tell you could possibly go wrong and then try and come up with a plan to get around it. I think that 20 times out of 20, 100% of the time, I'll figure out a way around it. That's what any confident, good lawyer would say. So I'm sitting here, you've got all these plates spinning and you think I'm trying to knock your plates down. I'm not. I'm just trying to tell you there's a lot of plates spinning and it's going to be a fair amount of work to keep them all spinning. Will you do it? Yeah, you'll do it. If you have the right agency and you have the right doctor and you have the right lawyer and you have the right professionals and you're in the right state, you'll be fine.
I appreciate having your perspective because I do think that it's opened up this dialogue to not feel like we have to hold our breath and be scared, right? I do think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I appreciate your perspective, and having us be able to really kind of just focus on what we're trying to do is good work and helping our clients and the best of our ability. So it starts with these podcasts and having these conversations and this dialogue.
And maybe things will get harder, but then they'll get easier again, and then they'll get harder, different hard.
The pendulum never stops. So it might be harder to get a Social Security card, but you don't really need a Social Security card to do surrogacy. Yeah. It might be harder to get a birth certificate in some states. It might be harder, we might have to jump through some hoops, but it's never going to stop. Yeah. So I don't think people should be scared. I think people should be educated and make informed decisions and be wary. Be aware and be prepared. And then avoid situations like I read about in some newspaper article yesterday. What was that?
Oh my gosh!
Did you guys see that
the
article?
baby, the
New York Times,
baby project.
New Yorker? I don't know what it was.
Is that what it was?
The New Yorker was something. Someone sent it to me, and I actually know that guy. He came to us, and we bounced him. Way back, I don't know what it was, 5, 6, 7 years ago. That guy, who's the subject of that article, came to us in our law office, told us what his plan was. Offered us a big bag of money, and we bounced him like, no, we're not doing that. No, I don't know it's now. It's disgusting. I mean, I'm trying to figure it out. Which lawyer he ended up going to. He obviously had a lawyer. Which clinic he went to. Although I think the article mentioned HRC, but I don't know which doctor.
Yeah, they said an HRC in LA and then Kind Body in Chicago.
Yeah, Kind Body.
Yeah, I have an idea of who it was. Well, I'm certainly not going to say it out loud.
What's funny is I was reading that article yesterday, Dean, and I thought of you. And I thought of something that you had said offhand about a client that you had turned away with a bag of money and where that person had gone. And so I think I have an idea
you know what?
of where you think he went to.
That's funny because there's 2 times, and I knew at the time these are going to end up going bad. One was the one that you and I were probably talking about before, which is not this guy, but the guy who had like 5 babies simultaneously and tried to go to court and get a judgment for all 5 babies on the same day. Mm-hmm. We bounced him, and now we have this guy. And again, I don't know. I'm not going to say where I think he went, and I'm not going to say anything. Yeah. But I have my own personal ideas, and then eventually it'll probably come out. And that's the 1%. If it's that's who falls in the 1%. And these kinds of cases, these bad stories,
are what changes our industry.
Just as much of a risk to our industry as Donald Trump and his administration, because these bad cases are what lead to bad laws and bad legislation. You say that we are, relatively unregulated. I promise you, the regulations will be bad. Not because they're not well-intentioned, but because they'll be knee-jerk reactions and not well-written.
Well, and a money grab, because there's the ability to regulate it, and how can we also insert ourselves into that, I think that's the other reality of it, too.
Yeah, just raising the price of things already even further. I think it's so important for us to hold each other accountable, right, in this industry, but then it's also we have to protect ourselves from liability by not calling people out for things, and so it's...
Well, this is the problem that the police have, right? They call it that thin blue line. The cops know who the bad cops are. The cops know who's out thumping people with their PR-24 stick or using excessive force, but they won't step forward and report on their brother cops. We all go to the SEEDS conference, and you've got 400 people in the room. I guarantee you 385 of them know who the bad doctors are, who the bad lawyers are, but no one says it out loud.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
What do we do about that?
Say it out loud, or at the very least, say it quietly under your breath and stop sending them business.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple doctors that I've sued, and I just, for the life of me, still don't understand how they're still in business. But
We can't obviously say it on a podcast, but
no.
I'm going to talk to you afterwards.
I know. We are going to continue this conversation. Yeah. I'm really curious.
Well, just for the podcast record, I'm not telling you any names of anybody.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yes, of course not.
Okay. A couple of the things I want to make sure we talk about is what do you think, like, as far as immediate changes that might affect surrogacy laws? Is there any particular legislation or any cases that you're watching or that we should keep an eye on?
There's no legislation.
That's
pending. It's certainly not in the Western Hemisphere of the United States. Nothing in Washington, Oregon, Nevada. There's some legislation in Arizona. I don't think it's pending. I think it's already passed. I'm not a fan of it. Some lawyers are going to Arizona. Personally, I'm not sending my clients to Arizona. There's a pretty strong anti-abortion statute in Idaho, which I would consider the Western Hemisphere of the United States. New Mexico. I mean, I could sit here and go through all the 49 states that we would think about going to, but there's nothing on a federal level that's pending that would affect all of the individual United States. I don't even think it's on anybody's short-term radar. We just have to wait and see what happens with this whole birthright citizenship push. I don't think anything will come of it at the end of the day.
Is there any advice that you have for potential surrogates and intended parents that you're just would give in general in some of these southern states that are going to move forward? Is there any particular advice you would have for them other than don't?
Well, I mean, remember, most of my clients are either international or West Coast residents. If I was a lawyer in Texas and I resided in Texas and I was working with Texas couples, I would figure out a way to do it in Texas, and I'd just give them the dose of reality is, abortion's off the table. So what I tell people is what I tell everybody in any kind of legal case is be fully informed and make a knowing, intelligent, informed decision. I'm not saying absolutely no, but make sure you know exactly what you're getting into. Read the fine print. Don't just sign a document without reading it, which is the worst thing you can do. And understand, what's on the horizon. Understand what Florida is now is probably not what Florida is going to look like next year. It's probably going to be worse. Mm-hmm. Look for what they do in Alabama. All these, they're like lemmings. So once one southern state says embryos are people, every other southern state's going to follow right off the cliff. That's really what I'm looking at. I'm looking more at that than I'm looking at birthright citizenship in terms of what's the closest thing on the horizon that poses a risk to the industry. I think it's that. I think the Supreme Court gets to that before it gets to birthright citizenship.
Yeah, I honestly, birthright citizenship, like you said, and we agree, it's a bonus if you're an international intended parent, but embryos as people is really the greatest threat. And the changes in rights to termination. If everybody's goal is to have a healthy baby and you are compensating somebody monthly to carry a pregnancy that is not going to survive hours or days or weeks past birth, it's kind of that's scary. I mean, those things are rare too, though. I mean,
they are,
but of course it's that percentage doesn't matter. There's so many births happening. If 1%
it's going to happen every year. That's the bottom line. So
it's going to happen to someone.
There's going to be a bad birth outcome, or there's going to be someone who needs an abortion and can't get it. It's going to happen. Yeah. Just because of the sheer volume.
Yeah. I'm curious, Dean, I know you guys do insurance reviews and you help your clients in just purchasing a health insurance. Do you see we've already are seeing now that in open enrollment, there's some changes in what that policy covers and the cost of it and everything. What do you see or anticipate when new legislation kind of comes into play?
Well, that also varies by state. Each state has its own insurance companies, its own insurance commissioners, its own insurance laws. So I can't possibly tell you what's going to happen on a national level. Nevada's a great state because they actually passed a law that says insurance companies must cover the medical bills for the surrogate who's doing surrogacy. And there's really, when we talk about insurance, there's two types of insurance. There's the surrogate's insurance, and then there's the newborn baby's insurance.
Correct.
So I'm not even 100% sure which one you're asking me about when you ask about changes.
Surrogate.
I think the surrogate's insurance is the one that we're dealing, especially in California with all these 100% lean.
Well, they're not 100%. They're 33% lean, which is kind of like a negotiated détente because neither side wants to go to court and lose. The insurance companies are really relying on a law that was crafted for personal injury cases, and so is the lawyers that are representing the IP. So no one wants to go to court and lose that fight. In the meantime, we're funding legislation to pass a law similar to Nevada's, where insurance companies are required to provide coverage for women who are carrying a child, even if it's not their own child. And I think eventually it will pass. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means all of our insurance premiums are going to go even higher. I mean, you have to defray that cost, and a lot of people who don't require third-party reproductive services to have a baby will be pissed. Yeah. But I think it's better at the end of the day than not having mandatory coverage, and then the liens will go away.
I absolutely want to have you on again if you're up for it at some point, because you have a lot of wisdom and years in this industry, and I think it benefits everybody to hear. We have a lot of listeners, clients, and surrogates. I think this is helpful for them to see that and hear your perspective, and maybe have that breath of fresh air going, okay, this isn't necessarily going to affect us in a negative way right away, and I think that we'll see it coming.
Or if it does, there's people who know how to help us work around it. Yeah. I think Vorzimer Masserman has that reputation of just being in this for so long and for really having seen kind of everything. So we love that we love having somebody like you on. We talk to lots of attorneys, and there are lots of really great attorneys in this space, but I think not every attorney speaks with the confidence or the authority that you do on this subject. Or
I appreciate that.
So I really second that.
I'm glad that you spent the time.
My favorite compliment I got was from a client who compared me to the wolf on Pulp Fiction. I don't know if you remember that movie, but when Harvey Keitel's character, there's a dead guy in the back of the car, and it's parked in the garage, and there's blood and brain matter everywhere, and they call the wolf, and he cleaned up the whole mess when you think it's impossible. And I was like, that's like the greatest compliment I've ever got. Thanks.
I love that.
I mean, if you find yourself in a situation like that, it's good to have a wolf to call, right? Like,
it's all metaphorical, but I mean, some people think like you're just dead and there's no solution. And in my 30 plus years of doing this, there's never been a time where there was no solution. I mean,
I appreciate that perspective, because it is necessary to have
crazy solutions. There was an article just last week, I think it was in New York also, about that couple with, they lived 5 miles apart and they were each carrying each other's baby. I don't know if you read about it.
I didn't read that one, but I saw the headline and then I got distracted and I didn't end up reading it.
So
but the embryos were switched or something?
That was my case. So it wasn't discovered until 3 months after the babies were born. Judgments, they weren't judgments because they weren't surrogates. They already had birth certificates in the wrong parent's name. So they came, and I came up with a solution to basically treat them both as surrogates and get amended birth certificates, and went to court and explained it to the court and got a judgment and reversed it, and then they switched the babies. But when they first came to me, they're like, obviously they're devastated, but there's no solution. We can't. Another lawyer said it can't be fixed. There's always a fix.
Yeah. Jeez.
And in that case, so they've already bonded for 3 months with a baby, and then they have to switch?
Yeah.
Oh my
gosh. But fortunately, incredibly, they literally live like 4 miles from each other.
So they can still stay in touch.
They're still in touch now. They all hang out together on holidays. They visit the kids. The kids are best friends.
Oh
I mean,
gosh.
that's like the best possible outcome of a horrible situation.
Crazy.
And it's probably unlikely. It's like lightning. Probably unlikely to be that
happen
curable
twice.
again.
It's almost kind of lucky you got extra family, but
oh my gosh,
well,
crazy.
With IVF though, those are both really wanted babies, so it's not like one went into a home where it wasn't loved and wanted and lacked affection and nurture for 3 months. So they both were very loved and nurtured for those 3 months, just by different people.
Yeah, but what if the other couple lived in England? What if and under English law, the birth mother's the legal mom? It could have been a huge disaster. It was just luck.
Wow, crazy. Dean, it's called a mean tweet segment. There was only one mean tweet.
Is that what you said?
Yeah,
yes,
like
Jimmy
Kimmel's mean tweets. It's not for you. They're just these random comments that we get on our social media from people that are just so awful. And I used to try to respond to them, and I realized that was like just screaming into the void. So it's better not to engage them. We just block them and delete them, but we save them on screenshots so that we can share them with others so that you can respond.
What if for some reason the people receiving the child decided they no longer want the child? They can force an abortion too, asking because I already know a woman that happened to. Very traumatic when the person carrying the child is against abortions. I wouldn't call that a mean tweet. I would call that a legit question.
We wanted to choose one that had legal aspects, so you didn't get to read one of the really ugly, hateful ones. But
at least it's like one. I'm not on Jimmy Kimmel where they say you're ugly and you sound stupid.
No,
tweet.
We got nothing mean about you.
No, not
I've
even a little
had
bit.
cases like this. I've had cases where the people receiving the child decided they no longer want the child. Can they force an abortion? No, you cannot force the abortion of a healthy child. Not only by virtue of the contract that we write, but you're not going to find an ethical doctor in California that's going to abort a perfectly healthy child just because the intended parents changed their mind. In our particular case, there was a couple that discovered that there was something wrong with the child, specifically that the child had dwarfism, but was perfectly healthy, and decided they did not want a child with dwarfism. But we as the lawyers would not advocate for termination. The doctor would not advocate for termination. Dwarfism is not something that severely impairs a person's life or quality of life, and it's not a basis for termination. So that being said, we also cannot force, this was an international couple, someone to come to the United States and get their baby. So what I did is I have a number of clients who have tried unsuccessfully over the years to have a child through IVF, and for whatever reason it failed. The quality of the embryos were bad, or they just didn't end up with a healthy pregnancy. I have a long list of people who still want to be parents. So with the consent of the intended parents who were backing out, I contacted a couple who I knew wanted a baby and were desperate to have a baby and wouldn't care about dwarfism. And we did new contracts, and I went to court and finalized their parental rights, basically subbed in new intended parents with the consent of the surrogate and her counsel and the original intended parents. And they took that baby, and they still send me pictures of that baby, and he's about 6 years old now, and he's adorable.
Oh, I love that. Dean, okay, as a surrogate, I think those are our worst fears of what if the parents change their mind. So you've done this for 31 plus years. How often does that happen? Because the reality is I've been doing this a long time. It is unlikely that those things happen. The statistics,
unlikely, right, is not never. Right?
Never. And how do we reassure the surrogates, and what do you see in your experience? How often is that happening?
31 years, probably 35,000 plus births. I've seen it twice.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to be able to reassure these women.
Like I said, maths. I would need to pull out my calculator to see what.
1 in 35,000 or 2 in 35,000 are
2 in 35,000. That's probably like 0.00001%. I mean, it's extremely rare. And to that point, even in 35,000, there's only been one time that I ever recall where the intended parents one party wanted to terminate the pregnancy and the other party changed their mind and refused. So that's one time out of 35,000. And at the end, the baby died at birth, which is what we all knew was going to happen anyway. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these are really extremely rare occurrences.
Situations. Yeah.
Which is, emboldening. It should not be the thing that the surrogates worry about. Much more likely that the trust is underfunded or, something
life
like
insurance
that.
Isn't purchased. That's
I
more
wouldn't
coming
worry
back
about
to
if
the
I was the
agencies.
surrogate and I was the attorney for the surrogate. I would tell them, don't worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been very insightful and the best mean tweet segment that we've had.
It's nice that we don't have we got to have a happy story in that we didn't.
Yeah,
have
I'm
to
glad
tell
there's
you
no real mean tweets.
No,
But
it's
next
really
time we'll
just,
get you a real mean one.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
won't be
after this
personal and it won't be
podcast,
about you.
Everybody gets to
But
comment on this podcast, then bring me back for the mean tweet that were specific to this one.
Yeah.
all right.
Okay.
I get a lot of them I get a lot of personal attacks on our social media all the time. I'm like, ouch, that's so hurtful.
mean.
I had to stop reading the comments, or I'm like, can these not come to me? I don't need to hear all these insults about listen, I know I have crazy hair colors. I don't need to hear about it.
Yeah.
I love your hair.
I don't think I would even read them. I mean, I'm kind of at a point in my life where I don't care what anybody says about me.
Yeah.
You have that vibe. I got it. And I like it. I like
And
it.
I appreciate it.
I'm gonna try and take on some of that, more of that for myself.
Yeah. Thank you
It's
so
a gift.
much.
If you can give yourself that gift and not really give a shit what people think or say, you'll have so much more freedom and peace of mind.
I agree.
And we only
Took
just
me a
get this
long
one
time.
life, as far as we know. Might as well enjoy it.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, this has been amazing. As always, Dean, we so much enjoy spending this time with you. And we will be doing this again if you'll have us anyways. We'll have you on.
I can't have you, but you can have me again.
Okay.
Okay.
Amazing. Thanks, Dean.
Okay, thank you.